They didn't expect me to show up. Not in heels, not in silk. And definitely not carrying a manila folder full of paper that could shatter every vow about to be spoken under that white trellis. But there I was. I stood just beyond the ceremony arch, on the edge of a perfectly trimmed lawn that smelled of roses and mock sincerity. Guests whispered behind white gold programs. His mother looked like she'd seen a ghost, which in a way she had. I hadn't been mentioned in years. I was erased, packed away like an old coat you forget you ever wore. But ghosts don't vanish when you ignore them. Some return, holding receipts. The bride hadn't seen me yet. She was laughing, tossing her head back, radiant and pink-cheeked, holding a bouquet of lilies. I'll admit it. She was stunning, young, confident, wrapped in the sort of glow that only comes when you're too new to know better. I watched her, standing beside a man I used to call my husband. His hands trembled. From where I stood, I could see it. Just a flicker at first, the way his fingers jerked nervously as he held hers, the way he blinked too fast. Sweat pricked his hairline. His smile slipped, not enough for her to notice. But I noticed. God, I noticed. Because I knew him. Better than she ever would. Better than I ever wanted to. Let me tell you how we got here, because this didn't start with fury. It started with loneliness. Back then, I wasn't the kind of woman who interrupted weddings. I was the kind who sent cards on time and baked lasagna for grieving neighbors. A widow of 8 years, retired school teacher, quiet, soft-spoken. I wore slippers more than I wore shoes, had a garden, a little gray cat named Misty, a drawer full of crossword puzzles. When I met Graham, I hadn't been looking for love. I was too old for fairy tales and too practical for foolishness. But loneliness isn't logical. It's not a guest you invite. It's a squatter that moves in quietly and rearranges your whole world. He walked into my life on a rainy Thursday at a coffee shop. I'd spilled chamomile tea on my skirt, fumbling for napkins when he knelt to help. "Storms always find the kindest people," he said. That was Graham. Always knew the exact sentence to make you feel seen. 32 years old, fit, freelance consultant, or so he said. He complimented the small things, my handwriting, my choice of nail color, the way I listened without interrupting. He made me feel interesting. That hadn't happened in a long time. We began meeting every Thursday. He started remembering things I'd said. Little details, like the year my husband died or how I liked my toast burnt. He was attentive, not overbearing, curious, not clingy. I told myself it was just coffee, just kindness, just company. But then came the rain checks, the Sunday afternoon movie nights, the soft confessions about his rough childhood, his struggles with trust, his fear of being too much. He told me, "You're different. You don't judge me." And I believed him. You have to understand, he didn't love me loudly. He loved me like a fog, slowly, invisibly, until I couldn't see anything else. 3 months in, he kissed me. We were on my porch, watching lightning bugs blink across the lawn. He held my hand like it was something precious, told me I was the first woman who ever made him feel safe. I didn't fall in love with him like a teenager. I fell with my eyes open, cautious, one breath at a time. But fall, I did. I started adjusting my life around him. Subtle things. Switching my doctor's appointment to match his lunch break, letting him borrow my car, introducing him to my friends as my companion. That word made me feel 90. He hated it too. "Why not call me your partner?" he joked. "Sounds like we're building something." And I thought we were. Until things began to blur. The affection stayed, but the language changed. He'd say things like, "Sometimes I wonder what people think when they see us together. It's not conventional. You're different from the women I usually date. It's not forever, you know. Nothing is. That's what makes it beautiful." At first, I dismissed them. We were different. I was older. I didn't expect him to propose or promise me forever. I just wanted honesty, respect, shared moments. But those comments, they grew teeth. By the 7th month, he started vanishing for whole weekends. texts unanswered, phone off. Then he'd return, smiling like nothing had happened. "Sorry," he'd say. "I just needed space. It's hard being seen as the kept man." He said it like it was a joke, but jokes are often truths in disguise. That was the first time the word phase came up. He didn't call me that directly, not yet, but he said something close. We were in the kitchen. He was pouring wine. I asked him if he still wanted this. Us. He leaned on the counter, glass in hand, and said, "I think we were what I needed for a season. You helped me heal." A season? Like I was autumn. Pretty while I lasted, but fading fast. I didn't say anything that night, just nodded, let him finish the wine. Then I cried in the shower where he wouldn't hear me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You want to know what was in that folder, don't you? Let me say this. When a man tries to erase you, make sure your name is written in ink where it matters, on contracts, on certificates, on anything that bleeds power. Because I didn't just walk into his wedding that day with heartbreak, I walked in with evidence. And he knew it the moment he saw my face. There's this thing that happens when someone sees you in a light you'd long turned off. You begin to adjust your reflection to match their eyes. That's what Graham did to me. He didn't just make me feel loved, he made me feel new. I didn't realize until much later that I was trading pieces of myself to keep that illusion alive. He started small. "Let's go out," he said one Friday night, just 3 weeks after that first kiss on my porch. "I want to show you off." I stood in front of the mirror, fidgeting. My body wasn't what it used to be. Gravity had its say, and time had softened every edge I once flaunted. I chose a lavender blouse and black trousers. Safe, elegant, age-appropriate. But when he arrived, he frowned. "Do you have something a little younger? You have great legs. Show them." That should have set off an alarm, but instead I laughed. I told myself it was sweet, that he saw beauty where I saw wear. I changed. I let him dress me eventually, suggest makeup, hairstyles, perfumes. "You're like a hidden masterpiece," he said. "You just need the right frame." I felt flattered. I didn't see the insult buried inside the praise. Our nights together became the rhythm of my life. He'd tell stories in bed, wild, chaotic things about working odd jobs, traveling without plans, escaping from controlling exes. I asked little about those women. I should have asked more. Instead, I told myself, he's with me now. The past doesn't matter. He's just complicated. We all tell ourselves things to make discomfort more palatable. The first time he borrowed money, it was cloaked in humility. "I hate to ask," he said, eyes downcast, "but my freelance check's delayed and rent's due. I promise I'll pay you back." He looked so embarrassed, so ashamed. It wasn't a lot, $1,000. I wrote the check. It wouldn't be the last. By the 5th month, he had a drawer at my house. By the 6th, a key. That part wasn't discussed. It just happened, slowly, subtly, until I realized his cologne lived in my bathroom and his charger was always plugged beside my bed. I made room for him, in the closet, the fridge, my calendar. My friends began to ask questions. Linda, my former co-teacher, pulled me aside at a book club meeting. "Do you really know him?" she asked. "I mean, where he comes from, what he does." I stiffened. "Just be careful," she said. "He's very, charming, too charming." I snapped at her, told her she didn't understand, that I hadn't felt this alive in years. But that night, after Graham fell asleep next to me, I stared at the ceiling, her words looping. Do I really know him? The cracks widened one Sunday afternoon. We were having brunch at my house. I had made lemon scones and poured us both fresh coffee. I was telling a story about a student from years ago, a sweet boy who always brought me wildflowers, when I noticed Graham was staring at his phone, not listening. I paused. "Am I boring you?" He looked up, surprised. "What?" "I was talking." He smirked. "Sorry, it's just... These stories, they're sweet. But they're from another lifetime. You're not her anymore." Another lifetime? I was stunned silent. That night, he said he needed space, that he felt like I was clinging. It shattered me. I spent the next day rereading old texts, trying to pinpoint the shift. The affection was still there, the good morning messages, the hearts, the compliments, but there was a hollowness behind them now, like he was going through motions. He came back 2 days later, apologetic, flowers in hand. "I just panic sometimes," he said. "You're more patient than anyone I've ever known." I forgave him. Again. By the 7th month, the lies had faces. One of them was named Sienna. I found her by accident. Graham left his tablet on the coffee table. Not locked. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a recipe he'd bookmarked. Instead, I found a text chain. Her contact name was just S, but the messages were unmistakable. "Can't wait for this to be our place." Did she buy the excuse? 3 more months, babe. Then we can be free. I sat there cold, numb. The scones from that morning sat uneaten. My fingers trembled as I scrolled further. Hotel receipts, weekend getaways, dinner reservations. He wasn't just cheating. He was planning something long-term, something that didn't include me. He came home that night with takeout whistling like the world was unbroken. I didn't confront him. Not immediately. Not with rage. Instead, I asked calmly, "Do you still love me?" He blinked. "Of course." "Then let's make it official." He laughed nervously. "You mean marriage?" I nodded. "Yes, you said we're partners. Let's be legal partners." There was a long pause. Then he smiled, a slow, careful smile. "As long as we keep it low-key," he said. "Nothing public. Just us." I agreed, and just like that, we were married. At the county clerk's office, no witnesses, no flowers, no rings, but the papers were signed, stamped, filed. He kissed me on the forehead afterward and whispered, "Now you're mine." I didn't know it then, but what he meant was, "Now I own the silence that will bury you." But I wasn't done, not yet. Because when a woman is hurt in her 20s, she burns. When she's hurt in her 60s, she plots. A marriage should feel like an anchor, heavy with commitment but grounding. Ours felt like a curtain, thin, decorative, meant to block light, not hold weight. He didn't change overnight. That would have been too obvious. Graham was smarter than that. His was the kind of cruelty that arrived in layers, one missing "I love you" at a time. One forgotten dinner, one accidental public introduction where he simply called me a friend from work. The night after we got married, we didn't celebrate. He claimed he was tired. "Long day," he said, peeling off his shirt, scrolling through emails even before his shoes came off. I was in the kitchen, setting 2 glasses and opening a bottle of wine I'd saved for months. He didn't touch it, didn't even look up when I toasted to us. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling again, counting the cracks. It wasn't just the ceiling that was splitting. The following week, he moved into a small apartment for work, said he needed space to focus, to be productive. I asked if we were okay. He kissed my forehead again, always the forehead, never the lips anymore, and said, "This is just a pause, love. Sometimes love breathes better from a distance." I believed him. Even packed him a box with clean towels and coffee filters, a wife doing what wives do. For a few weeks, things stayed oddly normal. We texted, we talked, not as much as before, but enough. He said he was busy, that he'd call. Sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. I kept myself occupied, tended to the garden, read the same books twice, kept Misty fed and curled beside me. But the house echoed now. His toothbrush sat untouched. His shoes never moved. The scent of his cologne started to fade from my pillow. I sprayed it again one morning, like a fool. I was trying to preserve the lie. It was Linda again who first planted the seed. She stopped by on a Tuesday, unannounced, brought lemon tarts and that concerned look I'd come to resent. "He's not staying with you?" "No," I said. "He's working on something big. Needs focus." She nodded but didn't believe me. She placed a folder on my table. Newspaper clippings, a printed blog post, a blurry photo. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. I didn't. It's the same man, different name. 3 years ago in Charleston. He dated a widow, took money for a fake business, vanished. The photo was older, but the eyes were the same. That smirk, that smooth posture of someone who's always 5 steps ahead. I stared at the folder for hours after she left. Didn't cry, didn't scream, just sat there, heart loud in my ears. When Graham finally called, I didn't answer. The next morning, I drove to his apartment. I'd never been. He always said it was too messy. But I had his address. I'd mailed him a pair of gloves once. I parked across the street, waited, watched. At 9:04 a.m., a woman stepped out of his building. Young, early 30s, tight ponytail, high heels. She kissed someone at the door. It was him. He held her face in his hands like it was the first time he'd ever loved. He didn't look tired, or busy, or focused. He looked free. I didn't confront them. Not then. I just drove home, put my phone in a drawer, and let the silence grow. For the next week, I became an archaeologist of my own life, digging through drawers, closets, online records. I printed out bank statements, my credit score, his wire transfers, the wedding certificate, signed, sealed, filed under the state, and then the prenup. Oh, the prenup. See, when I'd asked him to marry me, to lock things down, I made a simple request. I want a prenup, just something to protect my savings. He'd agreed. Too quickly, in fact. Smiled and said, "Of course. I don't want anything that's yours, baby." What he didn't know was that I'd taken the contract to a lawyer the next day, had it notarized, certified, filed. It protected every asset in my name, not just the house, my investments, my pension, even the car. He had no claim, none. But what he had done was marry me, which meant legally I existed, even if he'd already deleted me from his life. I thought of Sienna. I had no proof yet, but I knew her name, found her Instagram from a tagged photo, them smiling at a winery. She looked happy. So did he. He told me once, "You helped me remember how to trust women." Maybe that was true. Maybe I was just his stepping stone. But stepping stones don't stay silent forever. I printed everything. The prenup, the marriage license, bank records, the copy of my ID, photos of us, his texts, the date-stamped emails where he asked me for money as a husband. Then I made one more visit to the county sheriff. I asked what it would take to stop a wedding, not just emotionally, legally. He said, "If you're still married and he's trying to marry again, it's fraud. You'd have every right to intervene." That's when I knew. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. He thought I'd vanish, that I'd wither in shame. But a woman my age? We've already buried our youth, our parents, sometimes our own children. There's not much left to fear, only one thing left to do. Walk back into the life he stole and reclaim it piece by piece. There's something powerful about folding paper, the sound of it, the precision, the finality. That week, my kitchen table transformed from a dining surface into a war room. Manila folders stacked neatly, document tabs in rainbow colors, a printer that hummed non-stop. Misty, my cat, stopped sleeping beside me, as if she sensed I'd turned into someone else. I wasn't the version of myself who cried in the shower anymore. I was someone quieter, sharper, and I had a list. The sheriff was kind. His name was Caleb, mid-40s, skeptical eyes. At first, he looked at me the way you'd expect someone to look at a pensioner who walked in claiming her husband was marrying another woman, until I slid the folder across his desk. He opened it, slowly, skimmed the pages. Then he sat straighter. "You said he's planning a wedding?" "In 2 days," I said. "Private estate. I have the address." He tapped the marriage license. "You know, this could be criminal fraud, especially with financial records tied to a deception. I'm not looking to press charges yet. I just want the truth exposed. And if he tries to stop you from entering?" I smiled. "That's why I'm here. I want you there. I'm not causing a scene. I'm enforcing my rights." He nodded. You'll need more than a badge. You'll need timing. We show up at the wrong moment, he spins it, gets ahead of you. I already had a plan for that. The ceremony was to be held at a vineyard about 40 minutes outside town, a place Graham once told me was too expensive to visit. Apparently not anymore. The guest list? Private. Invitation only. But one of my old students worked at the event planning company. I still had her number. A few well-placed questions got me everything I needed. Start time, entry protocol, vendor list. I wasn't going to burst through the doors yelling. I was going to walk in calmly, during the vows, just before I do, when the room's attention would be tightest. That was the point of no return. I spent the night before the wedding staring at myself in the mirror. I'd chosen a navy dress. Simple, elegant, modest. Nothing that screamed revenge, Ben. No messy hair or smudged mascara. I applied lipstick slowly, like a ritual. My fingers barely trembled. I didn't look like a woman ruined. I looked like a woman ready. My ring was still on. He never noticed when I wore it. He wouldn't forget it tomorrow. The morning of the wedding, I arrived at the estate an hour early. Sheriff Caleb followed in a separate car. He wasn't in uniform, but his badge was ready, so was a quiet female officer who would remain outside in case anything got hostile. I wasn't afraid of Graham. Not physically. But I was prepared for how slippery his tongue could get. Liars like him don't fight. They spin. At 11:43 a.m., I walked through the stone archway into the vineyard's inner lawn. No one recognized me. Why would they? I'd never been introduced to his real world. I was the shadow life he buried behind closed doors. But he recognized me. Oh, he saw me. I caught his eyes across the crowd, just as the officiant cleared his throat. Graham was standing next to Sienna, hands clasped, smile tight. The manila folder in my hand may as well have been a grenade. Let me pause here and tell you something about Sienna. I didn't hate her. Not yet. She was a symptom, not the disease. I wasn't here to ruin her day. I was here to end his illusion. I approached the edge of the seating area. A few heads turned. People began whispering. One elderly man squinted at me like he was trying to place a memory. That's when I heard it. Who is that? Is she someone's aunt? She's not on the guest list. Sienna turned. Her expression changed slowly, like a camera struggling to focus. She looked at me, then at Graham, her brow furrowed, confused, concerned, suspicious. I saw her lips move. Do you know her? He didn't answer. Of course he didn't. Because whatever lie he'd told her, I wasn't part of it. That's when I stepped forward and handed the officiant a sealed envelope. I'm sorry to interrupt, I said, voice clear and steady, but there's been a legal oversight. He hesitated, opened it, scanned the contents, then looked up straight at Graham. Is this real? Silence. Sienna's eyes darted between the two men. What is it? Graham tried to speak. It's complicated. And then Caleb stepped forward. Badge out. Tone calm. Ma'am, he said to Sienna, I'd advise you not to continue until you review these documents. Your fiancé is currently married under state law. I wish I could bottle the silence that followed. It was thick stunned, frozen like the air had collapsed into itself. The bride's mother gasped. A groomsman muttered something under his breath and took 2 steps back from Graham. The officiant slowly lowered his booklet. And then came the trembling. His hands. Those hands that once undressed me like I was sacred, they shook like leaves in wind. Sienna didn't scream. She turned to him stone-faced. Is it true? He stammered. I thought it was over. I never filed. It was a technicality. A technicality? She whispered. She looked at me then for the first time, really looked. I'm his wife, I said quietly, legally, financially, and I was never a secret. He just hoped I'd stay hidden. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She stepped back. 1 step, then another. The officiant turned and left. The ceremony was over, but I wasn't done. Because I hadn't come just to stop the wedding. I'd come to make sure he remembered that some phases never fade. Some phases come with paper trails and penalties. The ceremony never resumed. Guests scattered like startled birds, some awkwardly pretending to check their phones, others rushing to their cars as if embarrassment was contagious. The violinist quietly packed her instrument. The flower girl cried, though I don't think she understood why. I just stood there, still, breathing, watching him melt from the inside out. Graham didn't chase after anyone, not even Sienna. He stood there beside the arch, unmoving, like a man realizing the stage lights were never meant for him, that every word, every vow, every perfectly orchestrated moment had been nothing but tissue paper, and I had brought the storm. Sienna didn't yell. She didn't slap him. She took the documents from Caleb and walked toward the bridal suite without saying a word. I respected that. She didn't turn into the drama. She turned toward the truth. I wanted to follow her to explain, apologize even, but this wasn't my mess to explain anymore. My part was done. I didn't gloat, didn't grin. Instead, I walked back to my car, slow, purposeful, folder still in hand. I hadn't needed to say much. The papers said everything. 3 days passed before he called me. I ignored it. On the 4th day, he left a voicemail. "You didn't have to do that. You could have just let it go. Why humiliate me like that?" I didn't respond. On the 5th day, he came to my house. Misty hissed at him from the window. I didn't open the door. By the end of the week, I received an email. Short, tense, defensive. "I want to resolve this. Let's meet. Just talk." He didn't mention love or regret. Only resolve. Like I was a business problem. I forwarded the email to my attorney. "You see, Father, this was never about the wedding. Not really. It was about erasure." He thought I was disposable, that I'd stay silent, too ashamed, too old, too tired to fight, that I'd shrink, not roar. But I'd kept receipts. And now I had power. 2 weeks after the incident, Graham received a legal notice. The prenup I filed was airtight. He had no claim over my house, my money, or my pension. What he hadn't expected, though, was that I'd included a clause, a condition. If infidelity occurred during the marriage, I could reclaim any money gifted during the relationship as debt. A clever lawyer had insisted on it. "He's young," she said. "Don't assume good intentions just because he smiles often." Thank God I listened. Because I filed for damages to the tune of $217,000. Every wire, every borrowed payment, every promise tied to love, now reduced to a ledger. He tried to contest it, claimed we were separated, that I was emotionally unstable and had staged everything. My lawyer presented the marriage certificate, the text messages, the photos, the receipts, and then the kicker. A dated voice recording, captured by mistake on a video I took while setting up my phone. His voice. "She's temporary. She knows it. Once the new contract clears, I'll be out of here. She can keep the cat." The judge didn't even look at him after that. The court ruled in my favor. He was ordered to begin repayment immediately. His startup, funded mostly by me, began hemorrhaging when I pulled out as co-signer on his loans. Clients fled, investors panicked, his business partners distanced themselves. It didn't take long before he was evicted from his apartment. I heard through the grapevine that Sienna cut ties fast and clean, moved out of state, started over. She never contacted me, never thanked me. She didn't need to. She had her freedom. That was enough. Months passed. People in my neighborhood began to look at me differently, not with pity, but with something closer to awe. "You were so calm," they'd say. "I could never do what you did." But they were wrong. Any woman could. Any person could when they've had enough. when they've given and given until they finally look down and realize their own hands are empty. One afternoon, as I pruned the rose bushes in my garden, a car pulled up outside. It was Graham's. He didn't get out right away. Just sat there, engine running, eyes fixed on the house like it belonged to someone he used to be. Eventually, he stepped out. He looked smaller, paler. That smooth, rehearsed confidence gone. He approached slowly. I didn't stop pruning. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why what? Why destroy me like that?" I turned to him, clippers in hand. "I didn't destroy you, Graham. I revealed you." He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "You made a bet that I'd disappear quietly, that I was too old to matter, too harmless to be a threat." I stepped forward. "You were wrong." And then I walked inside. I didn't look back, because I'd already done that for too many years. After he left that afternoon, standing in my garden, looking like a man whose mask had finally rotted, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea. I sat by the window and watched Misty bat at the curtains. I expected to feel triumph, some deep, satisfied grin. But all I felt was air, not emptiness, space. That was the moment I realized I was finally alone in my home, but not lonely in it. Grief doesn't just come when you lose someone you love. Sometimes it comes when you realize the person you trusted never existed. Graham wasn't the man I married, or rather, he was, but only in the way mirrors reflect light. He gave me the image I needed to see. He was never real, not fully. The man I mourned, he was a myth I stitched together from compliments and good intentions. And now that myth was gone. So I began the work of unlearning him. The first thing I did was repaint the bedroom. The beige walls he once called depressing became slate blue, strong, grounded. I boxed up the linen set we bought together, donated it, bought a new one, something warm, with rust-red accents and tiny gold thread. It felt like closing a door, one pillow at a time. Then I changed my ringtone. It sounds silly, doesn't it? But every time my phone rang, my heart would skip, wondering if it was him. Wondering what lie I'd have to untangle next. Now it plays something soft, piano chords, peaceful, unbothered. My hands don't tremble anymore when I reach for it. Linda visited again. She didn't say, "I told you so." She brought me blueberry muffins and a card that read, "Survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like silence, spreadsheets and steel." We sat in the garden and talked about everything but him. I loved that. She told me I should write my story down, maybe send it to a magazine or blog. I said no. This wasn't a story I wanted public. Not really. It was a story I wanted complete. One day, I took the manila folder and burned it. In the backyard fire pit. The marriage license. The prenup. The wire receipts. Even the printed Instagram photos of him and Sienna. I watched it all curl and blacken, one sheet at a time. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I wanted to stop holding it like a weapon. He wasn't coming back. And even if he did, he couldn't reach me anymore. The most surprising part? I didn't miss him. Not really. I missed who I thought I was with him. But I've come to learn that woman never left. She was just waiting. Waiting for silence. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for me to stop apologizing for being older, wiser, slower to trust. Because now I trust myself more than anyone else. 6 months later, I stood in line at the local post office. A man behind me struck up a conversation. Friendly, well-dressed, a little gray around the temples. He asked about my earrings. I said they were a gift to myself. He laughed. That's the best kind. We chatted about books, music, retirement plans. I told him my garden. He said he kills everything green except cactus. Before I left, he offered his number. I smiled and said maybe. He wasn't Graham. Thank God. And I wasn't the woman who needed someone to make her feel new anymore. People often think stories end when the villain is exposed. They don't. They end when the hero stops trying to prove they're worth loving. A month later, I got a final certified envelope from Graham's attorney, a check, a partial repayment on the damages the court ordered. Tucked inside, a handwritten note. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know how to stay. I read it once, then folded it. Not into the fire, into a drawer. Not for memory, for evidence. Because people like Graham don't fade, they circle. And I've learned that wisdom isn't just knowing how to forgive. It's knowing what to keep on file in case they ever come knocking again. Some nights, I still hear his voice, not in sadness, but like a foreign song you used to hum. And I remember, I was once the woman who made his hands tremble. Not out of fear, out of exposure. And that will always be enough. 2 months after the settlement was finalized, I received another envelope. No return address. Handwritten. Cream-colored paper, elegant, deliberate, someone who took their time. For a second, I thought it was Graham again. But when I opened it, my breath caught. It was from Sienna. Dear Mrs. Hartsfield, I hope this reaches you at a time of peace. I debated for weeks about sending this, but I felt you deserved more than silence, more than a ruined day, more than the polite nod I gave you as my world collapsed. I sat at the kitchen nabble, heart steady but curious. Misty jumped onto the counter. I didn't shoo her away. I didn't know. I want you to believe that. I truly didn't know. Graham told me you were his ex, that you were emotionally unstable, that you'd been obsessed with him, that you fabricated the marriage license and forged documents. I didn't believe it, not really, but I wanted to. He said you'd never show, that you were too old, too scared, too broken to ever face him again. He was wrong. I paused, folding the letter halfway closed. That line. He said you'd never show, that you were too old. Even now, it stung. It's always the underestimation that hurts more than betrayal. But she wasn't done. After you left the vineyard, I did my research. I checked court records, bank logs, even hired a paralegal friend to verify the marriage. Everything you brought, rock solid. He tried to lie again, of course. But this time, I saw it. That twitch in his jaw, that flicker behind the eyes. I finally understood what you'd already known. Graham is a man who survives on borrowed light. She went on to say she'd moved to Seattle, restarted her life. She joined a support group for women who'd been manipulated by men with narcissistic traits. She wasn't alone. That line stuck with me, too. I wasn't alone. Neither was I. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know you saved more than yourself that day. You saved me, too. I used to think strength was silence. Now I know it's showing up, even when your hands shake. Thank you, Sienna. I didn't cry when I read it. I thought I might. Instead, I poured a glass of red wine, walked out onto the porch, and stared at the fading sun. Not everything needs a confrontation. Some truths are best delivered in ink. Weeks passed. Life took on a rhythm again: coffee, gardening, walks with Linda, books left halfway open on the couch. I laughed more. I started cooking again, not for someone, but for the joy of the smell, the sizzle, the sense of ritual. Then came another twist. Not from a person, from a public notice. Graham's company had collapsed, yes, but that wasn't the surprise. What shocked me was the headline in the local business section. Startup CEO faces investigation over multi-state investment fraud. His name was buried halfway down the article. Authorities were probing multiple financial backers across state lines. Apparently, I wasn't the only one he'd borrowed from. An entire spreadsheet of suspicious transactions was circulating online. I sat back, tea in hand, and felt something curious. Not joy, closure. He didn't just lose a wedding. He lost the myth of himself. And he'd built that myth so carefully. In tailored suits, in fake credentials, in wine glasses raised over someone else's savings account. I called my lawyer the next day and asked a single question. Will I need to testify? She paused. Unlikely. Your documentation was thorough. You were the first domino. The others are falling now. I smiled. For once, I didn't need to do anything. The truth was working on its own time now. Later that week, I received a knock on the door. A young woman stood outside, no older than 25, long braid, canvas tote bag slung over one shoulder. Mrs. Hartsfield? Yes. I'm doing interviews for a podcast on financial fraud survivors. I came across your name in some filings and public court transcripts. I was wondering, would you speak with me privately? We can blur your name. I looked at her. She was polite, respectful, not hungry for scandal, hungry for wisdom. I told her, maybe, not today, but maybe. She smiled. That's more than I expected. That night, I pulled out an old notebook, the kind I used to keep as a teacher. I wrote a single sentence at the top of the page. He thought I was just a phase. And then, underneath it, he didn't know some phases come with fire exits and ledgers. I didn't write a memoir, but I started a journal. Not about him, about me. Who I used to be, who I became, and who I never want to be again. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful. Not for the heartbreak, not for the humiliation, but for the silence that followed it. In that space, I found a version of myself I'd forgotten existed. Or maybe a version I never gave myself permission to become. 6 months after the courthouse ruling, I started teaching again, not full-time, but one afternoon a week at a local women's center. They called it a life skills course. I called it a table full of chairs and truth. There were women from all walks of life, some divorced, some widowed, some never married. All of them had been underestimated, dismissed, or drained in ways that didn't always leave bruises, but left marks just the same. I never started with my story. But one afternoon, someone asked, "How do you know when it's time to stop forgiving?" I paused, looked around the room. Then I said, "When you start forgiving on someone else's schedule." The room was quiet after that, but it wasn't empty. Linda always said I had quiet thunder. I never knew what that meant, but I think I do now. It's when you don't need to raise your voice to shake a room, when truth walks in ahead of you and all you have to do is stand still. One afternoon, while sorting books for the center's tiny library, I found something wedged in an old gardening manual. A photo, not of Graham, of me. Younger, smiling, wearing overalls with muddy hands and a wild braid. I remembered the moment instantly taken by my husband, back when life was simple and the biggest crisis was a broken sprinkler head. But instead of sadness, I smiled. That woman in the photo? She wasn't gone. She was just buried beneath compromise. Now she was back with crow's feet, gray roots, and more peace than she ever thought possible. One evening, while watering the front garden, a white envelope fell into my mailbox. No postage, hand-delivered. Inside, a short letter, no name. I lost everything, the company, the investments, my reputation. You said one day I'd remember this, that I'd remember you. I do, every day. I'm not asking for another chance. I know I've burned those, but I wanted you to know. I never found another you, and I never will. Gee. I didn't cry. I didn't fume. I placed the letter in a drawer with the other one, the one from Sienna. Not because I needed to keep them, but because it reminded me I was once the chapter they tried to skip. Now I'm the page they keep rereading. Later that month, I finally agreed to record the podcast interview. I didn't use my real name, didn't mention his either, just told my story piece by piece. Not with rage, but with reflection. Not with tears, but with timing. When the episode aired, I got dozens of messages through the center. Women saying things like, "You gave me the courage to check my husband's accounts. You helped me realize being kind wasn't the same as being safe. You made me feel less foolish for falling." And that's when I knew Graham may have stolen my time. But I was taking back every voice that had ever been silenced like mine. Now every Sunday I write in that same notebook. Not about him, but about things that matter. The sound of wet leaves, how Misty likes her chin scratched. The way silence feels warmer now than it ever did with his arms around me. I write about peace, not the kind someone gives you, the kind you fight for. But before I close this chapter, Father, let me tell you something I never told anyone else. That prenup, the clause that saved me, it was never my lawyer's idea. It was mine. Months before Graham proposed, before we ever said vows in that quiet courthouse, I had a feeling, a whisper. It wasn't paranoia. It was wisdom. Age doesn't dull intuition, it sharpens it. So I added the clause, quietly, without fanfare. And when I handed him the papers, I watched how fast he signed them without reading. He thought I was naive. But I'd been married before, loved deeply, buried a man who'd loved me honestly. I knew what real love looked like, and what it didn't. So while Graham thought he was staging a temporary act, I was drawing blueprints for the final scene. And when it came, he didn't even know I'd written the ending. One of the women at the center once told me, "Healing feels like watching paint dry until you suddenly realize the whole room has changed color." She was right. For weeks, maybe even months, I hadn't realized just how different I'd become. Not just stronger, clearer, not just guarded, aware. I didn't walk into rooms bracing for betrayal anymore. I didn't stare at my phone waiting for apologies that would never come. I wasn't lonely, just selective. There's power in that. That winter, I took my first solo trip in 22 years. A coastal town in Maine. Small cottages, brisk air, and seafood so fresh, it felt like the ocean still lived in it. I booked it on a whim. Not because I needed to run from anything, but because I finally didn't owe anyone an explanation. I brought 2 suitcases, one for clothes and one for books. And for the first time in years, I read without checking the clock. I wandered without watching for someone else's steps. I sat in cafes and wrote letters to no one just to hear my thoughts on paper. On my 3rd night there, I ended up seated beside a man at a wine tasting class. We were the oldest people in the room. Everyone else was half our age, taking selfies and pretending to like the earthy notes of a red blend none of them could pronounce. We just laughed. His name was Martin, retired aerospace engineer, widowed, kind eyes, with a way of listening that didn't feel like waiting for his turn to speak. We talked about music, about losing spouses, about what it feels like to sleep in the middle of a bed again. He didn't ask for my number. He asked if I wanted to split a creme brulee. And somehow, that felt like the safest question anyone had asked me in years. We spent 2 more nights walking the boardwalk, sharing stories in silence in equal measure. He didn't ask about my past. He didn't push. When I told him I was leaving Sunday morning, he smiled and said, "Well, I'm glad the universe sat us next to each other, even for a moment." And that was it. No promises, no pressure. Just 2 people crossing paths at the right time, not to fix each other, but to remind each other that we were still here. On the flight home, I didn't cry. I didn't daydream about a fairy tale future. I smiled, because that was enough. A connection, clean and unburdened, a reminder that not all roads forward are dark or complicated. Some are just still. And sometimes stillness is where the light finds you again. When I got home, I unpacked slowly. Put a seashell on my windowsill, hung a painting I bought from a street artist named Louise. It was just waves crashing against black rocks, but it made my chest feel open. Linda stopped by the next day. "You look different," she said. "I feel different. Peace looks good on you." The podcast that aired my story got nominated for a local storytelling award. The host sent me a gift card with a thank you note. "You didn't just share your pain, you shared your power." That felt more real than any compliment I'd received in years. I still kept Graham's letter, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to remember how small his words became when I no longer feared them. They lived in a file now, not in my chest. And that's the real victory. One evening, I hosted a small dinner at my place. 4 women from the center. Linda, my former student who helped me get the wedding venue info. We didn't toast to revenge. We toasted to knowing better, to knowing ourselves. I looked around that table, candlelight dancing across every tired, beautiful, fierce face. And I thought maybe this is what real love looks like. Not romance, but return. To yourself, to your dignity, to your own breath. A few days later, I got a letter, this one from Seattle. No name again, just a line of handwriting I now recognized instantly. "I got the job. I start next month. I'm renting my own place. No roommates. Thank you for reminding me I was never too stupid, just too trusting. Sienna." I placed her note beside my bookshelf, right next to my favorite gardening memoir. Not as a trophy, as a bookmark. A marker in the story where everything started to bloom again. People think being older means the story is winding down. But the truth is, the endings get better with age because you finally know what not to include. I don't need a sunset romance. I don't need closure scripted like a film. I need mornings where I wake up and like the woman in the mirror. And these days, I do. She's still got laugh lines and bad knees. Still forgets where she left her reading glasses. Still hums Sinatra while folding laundry. But she also knows she is no one's phase. She is permanent, unfolding, unshakable. It came on a Monday morning. The kind of morning where nothing feels urgent. Misty was curled beside me on the armrest. The kettle had just begun to hum. I was 2 pages into a novel I'd already read twice. And then, a knock at the door. 2 knocks, light, hesitant. I opened it to find a man in a pressed shirt holding a brown envelope. "Delivery for Mrs. Hartsfield, signature required." I signed without asking questions, thanked him, closed the door. Then I stood there holding it. Brown envelope, no return address. My gut already knew. I peeled it open. Inside was a letter, not typed, handwritten, familiar slant. But this time it wasn't desperate. It was final. "There's going to be a trial. They've gathered enough to charge me. Wire fraud, intent to deceive, investment misrepresentation. My lawyer says I might get 5 to 7 years. Maybe less, maybe more. They say I built a house of lies, that I strung along women with promises, masked the debt, exploited their loneliness. Maybe they're right. But with you, it was different. I meant it, some of it. Maybe not in the way you needed, but in the way I was capable of. That's probably the worst part. I used your love to cover my own emptiness." I sat down as the words began to blur. Not because I was hurt, because for the first time he sounded small, not powerful, not clever. Just a man who'd finally run out of mirrors. "I know you'll never respond. I don't expect it. But you were the only person who saw me before I built the mask. You loved the parts I buried, and maybe that's why I hated you in the end. You reminded me who I could have been. I'm sorry for everything. If I could undo it, I would, but instead I'll serve, quietly." Graham. I folded the letter and didn't cry, didn't rage. I placed it in a drawer I now call the archive next to the others. A drawer filled with former selves and men who underestimated them. Later that week, the news ran a story about the trial. It wasn't on the front page. Fraud cases rarely are, but it was detailed. He was facing 14 charges. 5 named victims. A combined estimated loss of over $600,000. One woman was 73, another just 29. The reporter wrote, "He built trust like an artist, then cashed it in like a thief." And there I was, unnamed, but everywhere between the lines. Linda brought over cupcakes that night. "I saw it," she said, passing the box with a nod. "I thought you might." "You okay?" I nodded. He's exactly where he belongs. Behind bars? No, exposed. We sat on the porch splitting red velvet cupcakes while Misty rubbed against our ankles. "I've been thinking," I said, "of writing something longer, not a memoir, but something like a guide, for women like us who keep thinking it's too late to start over." "You should," she said. "You've lived every page." Weeks passed. Spring bloomed hard and fast tulips, hyacinths, roses exploding in color. I walked more, smiled easier, bought fresh lavender just because I liked the scent. And then came the postcard, from Seattle. No signature this time, just a beach. And 5 words, "I think I'm finally free." I pinned it to the fridge. It didn't need a name. I knew who it was from. One Sunday, I got an email from the podcast producer. "We'd like to feature your episode in a Where Are They Now follow-up. The audience loved your story. They keep asking what happened to you next." I stared at the blinking cursor, then typed, "I healed, I forgave, I grew, but I never forgot, and I never shrank again." That was all they needed. Months later, I sat in front of my fireplace, a journal in my lap. I wrote. He thought I was just a phase, something temporary, disposable, a warm shoulder between storms. But some storms birth forests, and some women learn to grow roots through concrete. He wanted me to disappear. Instead, I learned how to stay, without needing to be seen. You want to know what happened to him? He's in a jumpsuit now, a number instead of a name, serving time instead of stories. And me? I'm serving too, but not time, purpose. To women who don't think they're strong. To women who think love should always cost you something. To women who think silence is survival. One of the newer girls at the center, no more than 22, asked me, "Were you ever in love?" I smiled. "I loved someone deeply," I said, "but it turns out he didn't exist." She blinked. And I added, "But I love someone now, every single day." "Who?" I pointed to myself. "Because in the end, Father, he thought I was a phase. He thought I'd vanish. But the truth is, I became the chapter no one skips. There's a moment just before dawn when the world is completely still. Not dark, not light, just between. I've come to love that hour. I brew my tea, crack the window, let the breeze touch my skin and remind me I'm alive, not just surviving, alive." I used to dread silence, because silence meant space. And space gave memory too much room. But now, silence is where I meet myself. It's where I ask the questions I used to avoid. Are you happy? Do you feel safe? Are you proud of the woman in your skin? And most days I answer yes. Not always, but most. That's more than I ever thought I'd be able to say again. Sometimes I think about the version of me who fell for Graham. I don't hate her. She was kind, trusting, hopeful. She gave love like it was air natural, without conditions. She wasn't weak. She was unprotected. There's a difference. I keep a little mirror near my front door, not to check my lipstick, to check my eyes. To make sure the woman who leaves the house is the same one who walked through fire and came out smarter, not smaller. Because that's what survival should do. It shouldn't strip you down. It should build you back thicker skin, sharper tongue, softer heart. That balance? That's the miracle. Sometimes people ask if I regret any of it. The marriage, the deception, the pain. And honestly, no, not anymore. Because I got something better than closure. I got clarity. And once you see clearly, Father, you don't go blind again. There's a bench near the rose garden where I like to sit now, same bench I sat on the week after he left. Back then I was crying into my coat sleeve, wondering how I'd been so stupid. Now, I sit there with a book in my lap, my shoes off, the breeze warm on my neck. And I smile, because I didn't break. He thought I'd crack like glass, but I didn't crack. I cured. Like clay fired under pressure, I became something solid. Sometimes, I get messages from women who've heard my story. They always start the same way. You don't know me, but... And then they spill years of pain in just a few lines. Cheating husbands, stolen savings, vanished dreams. But every message ends the same, too. Thank you. You reminded me I still exist. And that's when I smile quietly, privately. Because I didn't start this for them. I did it for me. But if the sparks I lit helped someone else find their fire, then let it burn. I never responded to Graham's last letter. Never visited the courthouse again. Never read the trial summary past the first paragraph, because I don't need to. He's not my chapter anymore. He's my footnote. A warning sign I carry with grace, not guilt. There's something I say to myself now when I feel unsure. It's my mantra, my anchor. You didn't just survive, you turned the wreckage into a map. That's what I did. I turned betrayal into a blueprint, silence into a strategy, and love into something sacred again. Not for someone else. For me. I'm 68 now. People say that's late in life, but I've never felt more early. More here, more beginning. I don't wear rings anymore. Not because I'm afraid, but because I no longer need to be claimed. If someone wants to walk beside me now, they'll have to keep up, not pull me down, not rescue me, not reshape me. I come whole, and I stay that way. If you're listening to this, if you're watching this unfold on screen, and you think you're too late, too old, too broken, too far gone to take your life back, you're not. You're just in the quiet part before the return, and when you do return, make sure the world feels it. Make sure the ones who tried to erase you see your name written in bold. Not for vengeance, but because it was yours all along. I was a phase? No, love. I was the whole season, and it's still blooming.